So, watching the debate, moderating the debate, lots of great discussion, Charlie. So I'd like to make a couple points and then get your thoughts. And it has to do with the topic of ancestry, right? I don't mind defending the separate ancestry model, which would say not all life is related through common ancestry, rather than the common descent model, which would say that all life is related through common ancestry. I just hear a little bit of feedback. Make sure everybody's muted. Centurion, my brother, just because I think you might be on a phone, Centurion. So just make sure to unmute when you're not talking, and then feel free to unmute when. Okay, you're good. So what I see is a lot of agnostic lines of evidence for evolution and creation. For example, homology, shared structures in the biological world. Charlie, you would say that those were inherited from a past common ancestor. They point to common descent with modification. We would argue homology due to common design.
Right.
Okay. Now, so that's why it's generally agnostic. It'd be like me saying, well, the sky is blue or the earth is round, and so creation is true. But your model can explain that data too. And so I like to say we should look to differentiating lines of evidence. I like to say it's the differences that make all the difference. And so let's look to a line of evidence that can help differentiate between the two models, creation versus evolution, or universal common ancestry and separate ancestry, okay? And so here's just one of those points that I feel the evolutionary community struggles with, and I'd like to see if you could speak to it or even what your thoughts are. So I don't want to put you on the spot. If you haven't heard of this argument before, that's fine. Maybe we'll just get your thoughts.
Yeah.
So the Y chromosome, for example, okay, that's uniparentally inherited DNA. It is non-recombining for the most part. So it's less messy, as in we can look to Y chromosomes worldwide. We can build a family tree, and we can trace them back to a single Y chromosomal ancestor. The debate is that one Y chromosomal ancestor 200,000 years ago or 4,500, okay? But the point I'm making with the Y chromosome has to do with the chimpanzees. So the evolutionary model would make a very specific prediction based on its understanding that humans and chimpanzees are related, okay?
Yeah.
You would argue humans and chimpanzees go back to a common ancestor. Chimpanzees are our closest cousin. Is that right, Charlie?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So us from the separate ancestry model, we would argue that humans and chimpanzees are not related through common ancestry. They are the result of independent creations. Of course, not extant humans and extant chimpanzees were created. They go back to their own unique common ancestors. So when we look to the Y chromosome, again, it's paternally inherited. It's less messy, non-recombining for the most part. It's passed down on the father's side. Okay. So I got mine from my dad. You got yours from your dad.
Yep.
And so here's a chart, and we've got the Y chromosomes of the great apes. Evolutionary taxonomists would say that humans are part of the great ape family.
Yep.
We would say no. So when they actually compared the Y chromosomes between humans and chimpanzees, they discovered a few very interesting things. The human Y chromosome, you can see it here. Here's the euchromatin, the heterochromosome. So it shows you the size, it shows you the architecture and the gene content. Here's the chimpanzee Y. So right off the bat, you'll notice it's half the size. It's nothing alike in terms of architecture. And the gene content is totally different. I mean, the heterochromatin here is almost non-existent in the chimpanzee Y chromosome. And so when you consider overall gene content, architecture, and size differences, the human and chimpanzee Y chromosomes are only about 35% the same. Last point I'll make, when you bring in the gorilla Y chromosome, here's the gorilla Y chromosome. And this is from a secular paper, by the way.
Yep.
Okay, so when you bring in the gorilla Y chromosome, this Y and this Y, being the human Y, are more alike than either are to the chimpanzee Y chromosome. And so that's a break in the so-called nested hierarchy found within great apes that evolutionists look to. But two, and most importantly, how do you explain such massive differences
Well,
in
if you
just
look,
6 million years since the split. Go ahead, Charlie. Take your time.
so yeah, so my, and I am not a geneticist.
Yes,
what
you
I
are. Don't be so humble, Charlie. You're the jack of all trades.
I have to be an
Geneticist,
expert.
astronomer, biologist.
What I would say is, yeah, you can look at any one chromosome and find differences. But what you have to look at them as a collective of a greater whole, right? You can't just look at one. And I think this is what I see creationists do this a lot, is you look at one
Charlie,
thing.
if I could, I just don't want us to get too off track. Do you remember why I said we look at the Y chromosome versus the other chromosomes?
I do not.
Because it is the Y chromosome uniparentally or biparentally inherited DNA?
Uniparentally.
Right. What about the other chromosomes?
Like X, like that would be
Chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. Those would all be biparentally. Yeah.
So your Y chromosome lacks recombination. There's a little bit at the tips, okay, but for the most part, it lacks recombination, so it's less messy. You don't get, but with your biparentally inherited DNA, the chromosomes line up, right? They exchange genetic information or material. They shuffle, basically, scramble. So you get novel chromosomal combination, a little more messy. But here it's uniparentally inherited, and so and it only accumulates 1 to 3 mutations per generation, per male per generation. Okay, and so it's just a few DNA differences removed each generation. That's why it's important we look at the Y chromosome, which should be relatively more stable. It's less messy, and yet it's the most different. It's not just, well, there's a couple differences. No, I mean, you're looking at the visual, right?
Yeah, no,
I mean, in your opinion, does the chimpanzee Y look anything like the human Y? Just looking at these Y chromosomes.
Yeah. So from like related? Just naively looking at it, like, yeah, no.
Okay, so now that you understand why we look at the Y chromosome as compared to biparentally inherited DNA, what are your thoughts in terms of how, in the evolutionary timeline, how can you explain such massive differences in chromosomal content, chromosomal structure, architecture? Because in 6 million years, you see here, humans and chimps, right? They have it going back 6 million years. So this is where you have the split. So within that timeline, you basically have to go from a chromosome that's the same to a Y chromosome that is this incredibly different.
Yeah. So my answer for that would be that we're not identical species. We're not. I mean, that's the only answer that I can give without completely speaking out of my butt, right? Because I'm not 100% sure, but that would naively. I mean, I'm happy to look at more of the literature about this and read a bit more and get back to you and can tackle it from an evolutionist point of view. But yeah, I'm as you can see, I'm more than happy to admit when I don't know something.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that about you, Charlie. You know, you're very open to the data and you're willing to look at this as objectively as possible. Of course, we're coming at this from 2 different angles. So why I believe this is significant is because I would argue this is one piece of evidence that can help differentiate between the models. From the separate ancestry perspective, this is not really a surprise because we predict that humans and chimpanzees, will find data that contradicts them being related. This is from a 2020 paper. Okay, so this is from the conventional literature. It's not from creationist literature. And they admit, despite a recent divergence of these species, their Y chromosomes differ just a little bit. Because I get what you're saying, Charlie. I agree. If it's just a little bit, okay, well, maybe the evolutionary model can explain those changes since the split, right? Because obviously that lineage is going to accumulate its own differences, okay? But they admit enormously in size and gene content. They say, so firstly, it wasn't predicted. They were shocked, but notice this, Charlie. The chimpanzee Y is only half the size. We saw that in the visual as the human Y. The percentage of gene families shared by these chromosomes that split about 6 million years is similar to that shared by what? Human and what, Charlie?
Human and chicken.
Chicken. That split 310 million years ago. And then they point out, puzzlingly, in terms of shared genes and overall architecture, the human Y is more similar to the what?
To the gorilla.
than to the chimpanzee Y, even though human and chimpanzees share a more recent common ancestor. So that's a break in the nested hierarchy. And I would argue this is a very powerful point. This is very strong testimony to the separate ancestry model. Charlie, any final thoughts on that? I know you said you're going to look into it, but I just wanted to present you what I believe is a differentiating line of evidence.
Would you
that,
be
hey,
willing
only
to...
the separate ancestry model can explain it.
Would you be willing to send me that paper?
Yes.
Perfect.
No, I'm hogging it to myself. Nobody can see this paper except for me.
I'm not signed up. Ready? I'm gonna lose all this cred. I'm not signed up for any like literature like databases because the subscriptions are ridiculous.
I got a question for Charlie.